Hello again, watch friends. Welcome back. And a special hello to the new watch friends I made last week. With much anticipation, I arrived in Geneva by way of Frankfurt, Germany. I always like to change planes in Frankfurt, assuming there's enough time between planes, because I can get three of my favorite things: Brezels, which we call pretzels, Jaeger, and Lager. All fresh and as good as anywhere else I've had them. As you might know, Germany is known for pretzels, and they serve them with meals, much like a basket of rolls are served before dinner in the United States. Historically in Germany, pretzels have been associated with Easter and Lent, and the overlapping strands of dough are said to represent the arms of a person with hands folded in prayer. Jaeger is a semi-dried sausage traditionally made in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. It's great for snacking. And the lager in Germany is as fresh and refreshing as any beer I've had anywhere. There's nothing like having a German lager in the cool shade of a beer garden or in the airport. Arriving in Geneva was quite a tease. As I deplaned and made my way towards the luggage pickup, I was bombarded with billboards along the way for many storied brands, some of which I own: Audemars Piguet, F. Vacheron, Parmigiani, Beauvais, just to name a few. It definitely whetted my appetite for the upcoming tour. The watch tour was sponsored by Watch Time magazine and included 12 watch aficionados. This tour was the second one in Geneva, sponsored by the magazine, the first being a year ago, and was considered by all attendees a complete success. On Sunday night, we had the welcome dinner and got to know each other a little and learn what was in store for us in the coming days. In addition to making new watch friends, we got to see some really nice watches on one another's wrists and listen to some, should I say, watch tall tales. It was a very enjoyable evening. To try and capture everything I saw and learned during the week I spent in Switzerland would require a multi-hour video. I will spare you that. Instead, I'll provide some highlights of the trip and the visit with each brand in particular. Here we go. One couldn't start a watch adventure in Geneva in a better way than by visiting two brands that make up 2/3 of the Holy Trinity: Vacheron Constantin and Patek Philippe. I don't own a piece from either brand, yet, but VC is well known to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed the Patek exhibit in the summer of 2017 in New York City, which did whet my appetite for visiting the brand. Of course, the third leg in the Holy Trinity is Audemars Piguet, a brand we did not visit on this trip. At Vacheron, we were shown several areas including guilloche dial making using old and new technology, that is, motorized unit for standard guilloche designs, and hand-turning engine for more complicated designs. It's fascinating craftsmanship in either case. We were also shown the enameling department. This was downright incredible. Some of the enamel dials are standard and can be ordered when you buy a Vacheron Constantin watch. However, some of the other designs are specific customized artwork from the customer and rendered on the dial, all in 3 dimensions. In both cases, the work is hand done by artisans, artists, really, from conceptualization of the design to final realization. We weren't allowed to take pictures of the custom designs, but just look at that cougar. That's a standard design. Wow. And our host, Vincent, couldn't have been more of a gentleman, a quick wit, with a great sense of humor and a good sport. Of course, his English was better than my French, and I admit my French is non-existent, but I was able to teach Vincent a new word. He now knows what monkeying with a watch is. Our tour guide at Vacheron was a watchmaker himself, who took us through the component part finishing, assembly, and final testing. It was interesting to learn that at each step in the process, the individual doing the work was responsible for his or her own effort rather than having added layers of extra staff to do quality control. The highlight of the Vacheron visit was seeing the enamel dialing work, as mentioned before. And after seeing and getting hands-on with the patrimony with a lovely cream dial, I think I have another watch to add to my watch collecting goals. The Patek Philippe visit was at the Patek HQ in Geneva. Located in what we Americans would call an industrial zone, we passed by a number of recognizable brands on the way. Harry Winston, Rolex, Vacheron Constantin, just to name a few. At Patek, the tour started with a visit to the fabrications area. This was a little underwhelming since seeing industrial CNC machines that could be producing anything from widgets to engine parts to minute watch wheels and pinions could be the case. However, the precision required for miniature watch parts was amazing. But we were also shown at Patek the finishing of these piece parts, and that was truly interesting. We were shown the assembly and repair areas of the manufacturer. Patek, as you may know, keeps records of every watch they have manufactured going back to the early 1800s. So when a watch comes in for service, they can reference the movement and case serial numbers to first determine authenticity and, in addition, what work may have been done on a particular piece in the past. If a vintage piece goes in for service and they no longer have the replacement parts, they'll fabricate the part or parts needed to enact the repair. After the Patek visit, I had a new appreciation for the brand. I used to think that their advertising slogan, "You never really own a Patek, you just take care of it for the next generation," was a lot of marketing hooey. But after seeing their repair, restoration, and documentation departments, I realized it's more than just a slogan. When you buy a Patek, you are really joining a family, if that's important to you. In fact, you can't just walk into an authorized dealer and buy a Patek. They have to want to sell you one. But for me, the real highlight of the Patek visit was when a senior watchmaker presented a number of watches to our small group. Among the minute repeaters, tourbillons, and perpetual calendars were shown, there was a 150-year-old minute repeater pocket watch that was in excellent condition. An interesting discussion pursued about repeaters, how they work, and even that the different case materials provide different tonal acoustics for the chiming. I didn't know that. That's just one of the fascinating things I learned so far on the trip at that point. Monday evening, we had a special guest at dinner, who was Romain Gauthier, an independent watchmaker extraordinaire. With a background in engineering, not watchmaking, he decided about 10 years ago to strike out on his own with his unique and horologerie pieces. As he explained, he didn't want to just make watches like everybody else, albeit extremely high quality. He wanted to do individualistic pieces with finishing that is virtually unsurpassed, and he did. Not only is Romain a luminary in the exceptional horology world, but he's actually a nice guy and a gentleman. I'm glad I had a chance to meet him, learn about his passion and approach, and actually fondle some of his pieces. The next day, we visited Blancpain in the morning. Blancpain is another brand that I knew relatively little about until the morning of that day. Blancpain is a true manufacturer, making watches from beginning to end. They're probably most known for perhaps their iconic watch, the 50 Fathoms, introduced in 1953. But since then, they have been involved in motorsports, scuba diving, naturally, and even food and wine. Blancpain makes their own stamping tools for producing each component, and they have some 1,400 individual tools that are used to do this. They even make their own screwdrivers for their watchmakers and repair professionals because they want to control the quality of everything they do. One factoid I learned, and hadn't really thought about prior to the visit is that the word manufacturer really means working with hands. And that is exactly what Blancpain does. Whether it's producing the components from raw materials, like metal rolls or metal tubes, to their finishing work, whether a standard piece or a high complication item. Especially interesting to me was Blancpain's high complications minute repeater. Seeing the movement they placed under a microscope and displayed on a large video monitor allowed me to see the two hammers, one for gonging the hour, two in conjunction to chime the quarter hour, and the second hammer by itself to chime the minutes. If you count the various chimes, you can tell what time it is. Simply amazing. Check out this video for a moment. In the afternoon, we visited Hublot. I've never given Hublot a second thought. Their watches are big, blingy, and more often than not, to me anyway, ugly. But one of the goals of this watch tour was to see all aspects of watchmaking, from component production to finishing to assembly to high-quality mass production, among others. The visit to Hublot gave the group a chance to see case making at its finest. And one of the things that Hublot specializes in is using different and sometimes newly developed materials for their cases. Their Big Bang watch, introduced some 20 years ago, was the first to combine a rubber strap with a gold case. They also created, unique to them, something they call magic gold, which is a rose gold colored material, still gold, that is more scratch resistant than regular gold. Other novel materials used in their cases include carbon fiber, Kevlar, ceramic, linen, and even straw. Hublot means porthole in French, and we were given a porthole view into this interesting manufacturer. Case materials and innovative marketing are just two aspects of the genius of Mr. Jean-Claude Biver's company. That evening, we had a visit with the MB&F Mad Gallery in downtown Geneva. Whether it's a robot, spaceship, or singing bird inside a walking turtle, a fantastic example of automata, it was a pleasure visiting their gallery. After a busy day visiting Blancpain and then Hublot, we struggled through rush hour traffic in downtown Geneva for an hour to get to the gallery. You're probably familiar with MB&F and their unique, artistic, one-of-a-kind mechanical pieces. Regardless of the piece and specific automation, these contrivances are true works of art as well as examples of modern mechanical automata. Wow. I always thought MB&F pieces were out there, way out there in fact, and not something I'd ever be interested in. But I have to tell you that after some quality hands-on time, I have a new appreciation for their work. You need to have an open mind when it comes to MB&F, but given that, you realize they have some pretty amazing pieces. I was particularly taken with their LM101 watch, with platinum case and exquisite blue dial. Seeing it on my wrist and learning the unexpected depth of its design, I think I have a new grail watch to aspire to. Unfortunately, I don't have an extra 50,000 Swiss francs at the moment to purchase this extraordinary piece, although I can easily imagine it on my wrist. No trip to Geneva, or more specifically the Vallée de Joux, will be complete without a visit to one of the most storied brands in Swiss watchmaking, Jaeger-LeCoultre. JLC is not called the watchmaker's watchmaker for nothing. For a couple hundred years, they have not only made their own cases, movements, components, etc., but have also supplied movements to many other historic brands. They have one of the most rigorous testing measurements of any watch brand, their so-called 1,000 hours, where the movement is tested before it's cased, after it's cased, in 6 positions, tested for heat, tested for humidity, etc. The most exciting aspect of the Jaeger visit, and perhaps of the entire trip, was the watchmaking class. Under the direction of 2 senior watchmakers, 12 intrepid watch collectors were allowed to partly disassemble and hopefully reassemble a caliber 770 movement. Each student workstation had the movement, tweezers, jeweler screwdrivers, loop, and some other tools needed to do the work. It's amazing how small the components are, especially the screws. I had particular trouble grasping the screws with the tweezers. It seemed every time I pick up a screw, it would go flying. Fortunately, I only lost 1 screw. Getting the hang of using the screwdrivers in the correct way was a little easier, at least for me. The experience was somewhat frustrating, but did give me an appreciation for what it takes to be a watchmaker. Patience, good manual dexterity, and the ability to focus. Interestingly, one of the watchmakers told us that 80% of the watchmaker's job is to look, the other 20% being knowledge of the movements, etc. He said before you touch the movement, you look, then you do something, then you look again. It's an interesting perspective, I think, something I really hadn't considered before. In the afternoon, we were shown various departments, including where they blew their screws, among other things. Screw bluing, or blue screwing, as the case may be, involves heating the screws at 290 degrees for exactly 8 minutes in an oven. They do this rather than using a chemical treatment to achieve the bluing. Any longer than 8 minutes at this temperature would not result in the correct bluing, and they'd have to start over again. This is just one example that Jaeger is a true manufacturer. At another workshop, we were shown how and why the pallet stones are attached to the pallet fork with shellac. Natural shellac is heated and a minute amount is touched to the stones, and then the stones are inserted into either end of the fork. When the shellac cools, it's held fast. By using shellac, at some future time, a watchmaker can heat it up again to adjust the position of the stones if so needed. This process can be repeated up to 3 times. If a glue was used, it would probably be faster, but it would not allow the repositioning of the pallets. Learning about this small but important detail was part of the fun and added to my horological knowledge. High Complications was another shop we visited at JLC, where some pieces, the tourbillons, minute repeaters for example, can contain up to 1,400 components and take a single watchmaker 1 year to complete. Apparently, JLC has only 4 master watchmakers that can work at this level. In essence, these pieces are really handmade. The final stop of the day was at the Atmos shop. If you are unfamiliar with the JLC Atmos clocks, they are mantle clocks that use the change in air pressure to drive the winding mechanism of the movement. 1 degree of change in air pressure yields about 14 hours of power. Not only are these clocks beautiful, they are the closest thing to a perpetual motion machine. Simply fantastic. The visit with Ulysse Nardin was highly instructive, at least for me. For one thing, I learned that they were the first brand to use silicon as the material for their components starting in 2001. Some of the reasons for choosing this material are its anti-magnetic properties, its stable thermal properties, and low coefficient of friction. All very good things in a balanced spring and balanced wheel. Ulysse fabricates their own silicone material and makes wafers, much like those that are used in integrated circuit manufacturing, from which they cut out the components. Of course, the big difference is that for Ulysse, the scale and tolerances are much finer. This is a very expensive process, but fortunately they get about a 90% yield on their silicon wafer process. We were shown the prototyping, testing, and design labs where the calipers are created using what seems like the latest CAD design software. Every part of the movement can be seen in great detail, rotated in 3 dimensions, enlarged, color-coded, all to help view a particular component. One thing we learned and saw is that on a silicon balance wheel, the adjustment screws are inset around the perimeter of the wheel. The reason they are inset is that if they protruded past the edge, the screws would cause turbulence and affect the rotation of the wheel, and as a result, the oscillation timing. Hearing the description of this is one thing, but seeing the actual component on the screen made the explanation more understandable. One other interesting fact that we were told while in the design lab was that, for example, the caliper 188 has 1,000 drawings. Each drawing is available for use in their continuing improvement process and is used to provide details for their 3D rendering of the movement I just described. Ulysse Nardin is part of the Kering group, the other brands being Girard-Perregaux and Gucci. Ulysse has 350 staff at their main location and produce about 13,000 to 15,000 watches per year. The highlight for me was the biomanufacturing lab. Ulysse does several types of enameling, and we were shown some beautiful work. Most brands, even very large ones, don't do enameling in-house because it's such a specialized craft and difficult to do. Ulysse Nardin does their own enameling, but also does the enameling for many of the large brands, which, due to privacy, I can't mention at this point. Interestingly, neither Ulysse nor the brands that subcontract to them for the enameling will publicly disclose the truth. I would think it would be in both of their interests to do so, for Ulysse to showcase their excellent work, and for the other brands to show how they are using the best in the business for this aspect of watchmaking, even if it's not on their own from their own workers. But I doubt we'll ever see this secret exposed, given the historically private nature of the industry. I never knew the extent to which Ulysse Nardin was a pioneer in using silicon for almost, if not all, their entire movements. However, not all their movements are silicon-based. I also learned that the only downside to using silicon parts is that they cannot be repaired, only replaced. Next on the tour was a visit to Tag Heuer. Once again, until this trip, I was unaware of what Tag Heuer was all about. Tag produces about 700,000 watches per year and has about 900 employees. They were the first company to make 1,000 tourbillons and have the least expensive tourbillon available, one which sells for about $15,000. They are leaders in the product placement and are very big in motorsports. Tag has 8 watchmakers that specialize in the assembly of tourbillon watches and now produce about 2,200 tourbillon watches per year. It takes 1.5 days, we were told, to assemble a tourbillon watch. It's really quite remarkable that Tag has been able to bring the cost of a tourbillon down to this price level, and that's basically due to mass production. Mass production on a large scale also allows Tag Heuer to be an industry leader in their testing department. We were able to witness several testing procedures that are as interesting as they are useful. One test rotates the bezels of a watch 5,000 times to simulate a 20-year life of use. Another test twists and turns the rubber strap continuously until it breaks, again simulating typical use and to determine how they can improve the material. The third test is called the sun test. They bake a dial at 45 degrees centigrade for 25 hours to see the effects of exposure to the sun. There are metrics to which the results are compared, again to try and reach a minimum level of quality and determine how they can improve it. The level of testing done by Tag Heuer is unparalleled in the watch industry and shows their commitment to quality. Did you ever stop to think about a watch dial? Well, I learned that it represents the natural cycle of the sun. Sunrise to sunset. Starting at 6 a.m., the sun rises until its zenith at 12 noon, Then as the hands move clockwise from 12 back to 6, the sun is setting. We're so used to discussing brands, complications, etc., that a simple thing like this is often not even considered. At the end of the tag visit, we were treated to a visit to their museum. Here, some 350 watches were on display, going back to the late 1800s. The oldest piece was from 1880 and was owned by the founder of the company, Eduard Heuer. There are quite a few interesting pieces, and I especially liked the chronographs from the 1930s to the 1960s. Visiting the Tag Museum was definitely a highlight of the Swiss watch trip. Gerard Perrigo main manufacturer is housed in a late 19th century building that was restored to its original condition in the mid-1990s. Gerard Perrigo could have built a brand new, modern facility to make components and assemble and test watches, but the brand respects history in watchmaking and architecture. So they did what they did. They restored the building, which, as it turns out, was the original administrative offices of the 100-year-old predecessor brand of Girard-Perregaux. Part of the Sowind group, GP does not make everything that goes into their watches, but they freely admit this, unlike some other brands which will remain nameless. The respect for the tradition and pride in workmanship was shown in every lab and workstation we saw. The technicians and watchmakers were quite proud of their work and were eager to show it to us. Plus, we were allowed to interact with the staff rather than peering through plexiglass walls at the workers like had happened in some of the other brands we visited. One interesting fact I learned is the meaning of Le Chaux de Fonds. Chaux means pasture, as in after clearing the trees, and fond in Latin means fountain. So literally, Le Chaux de Fonds means the pasture by the water source. The group asked several brand representatives about the meaning of this locale, and it was only Willie, the guide from GP, who knew. Another thing that Willie taught us at GP is the greatest improvement in watchmaking in the last 100 years has been in machines and tooling. That is, transforming raw materials into watch components. The old way was one man and one machine. The modern way is one machine with one robot that can do 28 operations at once. And the accuracy of the machining is 1/10,000th of a millimeter. 30 years ago, that level of precision was not possible. And for the machines themselves, 35 years ago, it used to take 80% of the energy to do 20% of the work. Now it takes only 20% of the energy to do 80% of the work. This increase in efficiency allows Girard-Perregaux to produce about 10,000 watches per year with a total staff of about 350 people. And, by the way, 10% of that staff is in R&D. In addition to learning at Girard-Perregaux, it takes about 4 years and $4 million to create a new movement. We also learned an interesting historical fact about perlage and Geneva waves. Apparently, in the good old watchmaking days, 100 plus years ago, the Geneva waves and perlage, the circular graining, were added to hide mistakes. This was due to the machining not being as precise as it is today. Now, these attributes add to the beauty of the movement, whereas the original purpose was quite different. In summary, these particular watch brands that we visited were not chosen so much because they are brands that every enthusiast collects, but rather to give an overview of the watch business. For example, Hublot is not the first brand that comes to mind as one that every collector dreams about, but their case making is not only incredible, but legendary. I really enjoyed this Watch Time Switzerland watch tour. It exceeded my expectations in every way, from the brands visited, the food, the hotels, and the knowledge. Oh, and did I mention the food? Gourmet meals were an integral part of the trip. I want to thank our tour director and Watch Time editor-in-chief, Roger, for his knowledge, guidance, and ensuring that every need of every participant was met. His assistant, Sophie, did a splendid job of herding us cats, getting us where we had to be and when, handling even the smallest details, and most of all, her sense of humor. Sophie is German and not a native English speaker, but I think she learned a few American idioms that she has added to her vocabulary. The other person who did much of the advanced planning and background work was Steve in the New York City Watch Time office. His efforts surely added to the overall success of the trip. As I mentioned before, this was the second year that Watch Time put on the Swiss watch trip, and I understand they plan to do it again sometime next year. I highly recommend the trip, and most likely the 2019 tour will be announced at the end of this year. If you are interested, and I think you should be, I advise booking the tour early because it will, like this year's trip, sell out very fast. I hope you liked this video. If so, please hit the subscribe button to be alerted of future videos. Also, be sure to check out some of my other videos. You may find something of interest. And please share my channel with your watch buddies. Finally, a disclaimer. I have no connection whatsoever with Watch Time magazine, other than being a very satisfied participant of their highly successful Swiss watch trip. I have not been paid for this video, nor am I profiting from it. I'm just sharing one watch collector's viewpoint. Thanks for watching, and as usual, I'll see you next time.